It's just a week until the first whistle blows at the 2026 World Cup in North America and Mexico. Temperatures are set to be sweltering, and a group of scientists is raising the alarm about the impact on players and the quality of the game. Heat is also on FIFA as campaigners call out their fossil fuel sponsorship. Is it another own goal for their climate strategy? And spare a thought for the refs. On top of the climate, they're having to deal with a stepped-up VAR system this year. How will it impact their decisions? Our Football Weekly colleagues asked us to look into the science of the World Cup. And, well, how could we refuse? From The Guardian, I'm Madeleine Finlay, and this is Science Weekly. Ian, thank you for joining me at this very special Football Weekly, Science Weekly collab. Now, we're starting with something that might not be too familiar to the English and Scottish teams at least, playing in the heat. And this is actually something that's also got scientists worried. What are their concerns?
Well, the predictions are that this could be the hottest World Cup ever, or if not one of the hottest World Cups ever. And that has prompted a group of doctors and scientists to write an open letter to FIFA because they're really concerned about the potential for harm to players and even, match officials, the referees. I spoke to Dr. Oliver Gibson. He's one of the signatories of this letter, and he's a member of academic staff at Brunel, University of London. He studies the impact of heat stress on human performance. And I said to him, what is in this letter?
We focused our letter and the research on a metric called wet bulb globe temperature, which is a metric which encapsulates all of the environmental conditions that the players will experience. So it takes into account the air temperature of the environment that the players are playing in. But it also acknowledges that heat stress goes beyond just temperature. So there's a need to acknowledge the impact of humidity on the players, the impact of solar radiation, so effectively feeling the sun on your skin and the heat stress that imparts, as well as the potentially helpful cooling effect that comes from airflow and the wind speed that affects players.
They've worked out in about half a dozen of the cities where these matches are going to be played, and we're talking about places like Dallas, Houston, Miami. This wet bulb globe temperature could hit 30 Celsius, and that is brutal if you're playing football at the intensity that these elites are going to be playing at. But there's also a concern about what this might mean for, the spectacle of the World Cup, for the performance of the players.
Right, so what exactly will these temperatures be doing to the players physically?
Well, if you think about how the body cools down, obviously it cools down in a bunch of ways, but the main way is through sweating. The body has to sort of dilate all the blood vessels near your skin, and it pumps more blood through those areas. So you have the blood near the skin and sweat on your skin. As that evaporates, it takes heat away from the blood, okay? So that cooler blood then gets pumped back to the heart and circulated around the body. But if you think about it at the same time, for these footballers, their muscles will be demanding an awful lot of blood as well. So those are in competition. And you can get to the point where this cooling just stops working. It doesn't do enough, okay? And that is when it hits performance and obviously carries these health risks as well. And, the worst case scenario is that you get heat stroke, and that can be fatal.
In that scenario, the body temperatures increase quite substantially, 1, maybe 2 or even 3 degrees Celsius above its resting levels. The body also has what we call a reflex response to increased body temperature. So we'll see redistribution of cardiac output or the blood flow away from what the body deems to be non-essential organs in that moment. So, for example, the gut, the gastrointestinal tract, the kidneys and the liver. That's not without complications in its own right. So one of the pathways towards heat stroke emanates from the gut. We see the gut become lower in blood flow, and people develop this leaky gut syndrome. And with a leaky gut in players, what we see is bacteria that should be residing in the gut move into the bloodstream, and the body initiates then an inflammatory response to try and resolve those. It doesn't have sufficient blood flow to send those bacteria to the liver for clearing in that organ, and this inflammation contributes towards what ultimately can be fatal in heat stroke, which is multi-organ failure.
So this is serious stuff. And beyond the health risks, Oliver talked about how heat can impact the game itself.
We know that football matches played in higher heat stress conditions can seem a little bit more passive. They might be less engaging to the spectator. Players produce less high-speed running. They have the capacity still to sprint as fast, but they choose to sprint less frequently. So we might see in hotter fixtures around 10% less high distance running. If you take an average player, might cover 10 kilometres. Although there's some cognitive and decision making declines that come with heat stress, we know that actually an interesting kind of proxy to that, pass accuracy tends to go up when the conditions are hot, and that reflects players making more conservative passing decisions to retain possession and avoid the need to do lots of high speed running to recover the ball. There is a chance, I think, the spectator might observe that the games feel, at least in the early parts before there's a need for those activities to come, they might feel a little bit less thrilling, for example, or want of a better word.
So bearing in mind all of that, what does Oliver want to see happening to mitigate some of these risks?
So first of all, FIFA have said, look, our top priority is to ensure the health of the players, of the fans, of the referees, of everybody involved in the World Cup. And they have introduced for this World Cup, each match, regardless of the temperature, is going to have a cooling break in each half. What the researchers are worried about is that they say that the threshold for bringing in really serious mitigations, and that would be delaying or postponing a match, they say that line is too high, that threshold is too high. And at the moment for the World Cup, that would come in at this wet bulb globe temperature of 32 degrees. And these researchers say the recommendation should be 26 degrees. So they are looking for a substantial reduction in that threshold where officials can just say, it's too hot, we have to delay this game. But they also want to have some other changes made too.
To spend longer periods than FIFA have currently mandated. They have a 3-minute cooling break, which potentially is insufficient, and a 6-minute break would allow for more meaningful rehydration and cooling. Potentially there is a scenario that we haven't really seen in football in the same way we might have seen it in endurance sports like marathon running, for example, where we receive pictures of a player collapsing in the game and there's a suspension of play. Perhaps the temperature and the heat stress conditions mean that games are postponed and or delayed in game for substantial periods of time. All of those are really concerning.
Just finally, Maddie, we're now seeing players who've written their own letter in support of this to try and get FIFA to listen. And so hopefully that'll add some weight to it.
And so if there are any coaches or players listening, what should they have been doing to prepare for this heat?
Well, luckily, Oliver did his PhD on how to acclimatise to heat. So he's a good guy to go to. He says that in a couple of weeks of specific training in hot conditions, the body can learn to cope a lot better with this. And we're talking about training in hot environments, training in sort of heated facilities if you need those, and even bringing in things like saunas and baths into your training program. Maddie, behind these soaring temperatures is, of course, the climate crisis. And, there's some irony in the fact that one of FIFA's main sponsorship partners is Aramco, this huge Saudi oil and gas company. Tell me a bit about this.
Yeah, so FIFA signed this global partnership with Aramco, this huge fossil fuel company, just like you said, and this does cover the World Cup as well. And Aramco are actually the sponsors of Houston, host city. So fans are going to be seeing Aramco's name everywhere. Now, you might argue that this is a pretty clear example of sports washing. So that's when companies sponsor athletes or events to kind of improve their reputation. Bearing in mind, Ian, all that you've been telling me about in terms of the heat, I think there are lots of fans who are going to be not very impressed with this. The environmental impact of these sorts of events, very often you see it from flights, you might see like in Qatar when there were stadiums being built, but the impact of advertising is much more subtle. But there is an impact. I mean, they wouldn't do it if there wasn't. Now, I chatted to Peter Crisp. He's a campaigner at Fossil Free Football. It's a grassroots organisation of fans. And he said that seeing all the advertising of polluting companies made him feel like football was on the wrong side of things. and that actually the beautiful game, or the people in charge of it, really needed to start taking this seriously.
So what are FIFA's commitments to tackling emissions in football?
FIFA have committed to the global goals of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. So they've pledged to achieve a 50% reduction in their carbon emissions by 2030, and they've also pledged that they're going to reach net zero by 2040. They have a climate strategy, and one of the things that this climate strategy is supposed to do is to protect FIFA's tournament games. And that's from things like heat, from flooding, from extreme events. So it could even be things like smoke from wildfires. But Ian, their choice of sponsors aside, there are a few things that are going to make it hard for FIFA to argue that this World Cup is in line with that strategy. And that's because they've massively increased the number of teams in this World Cup. So it's gone from 32 in Qatar to 48. So that's many more games being played in the stadiums across 3 countries, the US, Canada and Mexico.
So what kind of impact will this World Cup have on the environment?
It's going to be pretty significant. So the organisation Scientists for Global Responsibility, they've calculated that this World Cup is likely to generate more than 9 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, making it the most polluting World Cup ever. And they've also calculated that this is about the same as 6.5 average British cars driving for an entire year. So that really puts it into some context. And most of those emissions, the majority really are going to come from the flights. So that's fans flying in from around the world and then flying between matches as well, flying between the 3 different countries. And look, if you want a big global event like this, some of that is obviously totally inescapable. You are going to have fans coming from around the world. But if fans in the Northern Hemisphere want to keep these summer tournaments, organisations like FIFA are going to have to start bringing down these carbon emissions, because the summer is becoming less and less viable to host these tournaments. I mean, us in the Northern Hemisphere, we love going to beer gardens to watch the games, around the games, going to parks, having a barbecue. And if the heat is really kind of repressive, that becomes less and less enjoyable. But also for the players, like you've said, for the staff, for the fans in the countries where this is being hosted, when there is this extreme heat, it's not safe. And sure, you can move the games to further in the evening and you can introduce these hydration breaks, but at some point it just isn't going to be enough.
Bearing in mind, this is likely to be an extremely hot World Cup. Do you think this is going to kickstart that conversation in football again?
This is obviously what campaigners like Peter Crisp are hoping for. I'm sure he wishes that they didn't have to have these conversations, because he pointed out to me that, there are billions of football fans around the world, and so there are billions of them who really care about the climate crisis and want to see strong policies put in place to protect the game that they love and they want to keep watching. And I do wonder if the fans are going to struggle this year in the heat themselves, or if there are other extreme weather events that begin to really disrupt games. This is going to be on the agenda. And Ian, the next World Cup is in 2030, so we can imagine what the temperatures might be like then. And the hosts are Morocco, Spain and Portugal. So this problem is certainly not going anywhere. Coming up, the psychological impact of VAR for referees and fans. Ian, did you know that studies have shown that heat makes people more aggressive and angry? I, for one, can attest to that. But there's something else that is potentially going to get fans' blood boiling at this World Cup, and that is, of course, VAR. And recently there was a study on VAR that you've been looking into. What's this about?
That's right. Well, this all came about when a guy called Dr. Daniel Walker, he's a researcher in psychology of sport at the University of Bradford, and he was watching a football match with his dad when the referee was called over to do, an on-field review where they go and look at that, look at the screen in full view of everyone, and his dad goes, this decision's going to be overturned, and Daniel was like, yeah, I bet it is, and it was, and it got Daniel thinking about, is there anything that happens in the fact that the game is stopped and the referee is told to go and look at this evidence again because VAR has decided that, he may have missed something? Are you kind of psychologically primed to think, yeah, I got that call wrong? So Daniel looked at more than 1,500 matches in the English Premier League from the last few seasons, so from 2021 onwards. And they found about 250 occasions where the ref had been called over to do one of these on-field reviews. And when they looked at how often those overturned the referee's original decision, it was 95% of the time. So clearly, if you're sitting there watching a match and VAR says, ref, come and have a look, the chances are that that decision will be overturned.
So what does this say about the impact that VAR has on referees' decision-making?
Well, first of all, I think we need to sort of think about how VAR, the video assistant referee, is there to spot clear and obvious errors or serious missed incidents, right? And this is actually, this is obviously a team of people who have the benefit of multiple camera angles. They have the benefit of replays. And so when VAR says to a referee, we think you should take a look at a particular incident, the chances are that they have got a good sense that something important has been missed, okay? In a big sense, it's not a surprise that these decisions are overturned. Now, how often should they be overturned? Well, I mean, that's really hard to say because a lot of these actual on-field reviews, they're often those fine decisions. Football fans talk about them for years, right? And they're the sort of, the lifeblood of these post-match phone-in sessions you get on the radio, right? But there is, there's definitely some psychology here because if VAR implies that you've made a wrong call and you walk over and you look at the video, that's going to be hard to ignore. You can either double down and risk making the wrong decision twice, or there will be a natural temptation to just, shift some of that responsibility to VAR. And I think there is that temptation. Now, obviously, VAR is not remotely universally popular, and among the critics that are out there is Alan Shearer, who thinks that refereeing has gone downhill because of VAR, because of this issue, because he thinks that referees are becoming too reliant on VAR and too reliant on the decisions they make.
I do think that's really interesting because if you have a decision where ultimately it is a bit of a grey area, you're the ref on the pitch, you've got this huge pressure around you. It would be so difficult to go against the VAR, I think. So, yeah, an interesting issue. But what about the fans?
Obviously, VAR puts a dampener on, if your team scores in the final minute, of a crucial match, that goal really has to count, but you don't know if it counts. So what do you do? Do you celebrate twice? Do you sort of celebrate when the goal goes in because you can't help it? Sort of one celebration out of joy and then a second celebration out of relief when VAR actually says, yeah, the goal stands. Or you have this situation where you celebrate because the goal's gone in, and then you have this sort of pretty swift, crushing blow of the decision being overturned by VAR. So all of that obviously adds to the frustration. Some people might say it adds to the excitement as well, but it certainly can be frustrating. But look, I think there's plenty of discussion still around whether VAR does something else to the game which is actually undermining the authority of the referee. Because, in the old days when you're watching TV and you'd be watching a match, the referee would make a call and everybody would throw their arms up if it went against them. But you would know that the referee's made a decision, that decision is final, and the game goes on. And, over time, these bad decisions, they even out, and it's all part of the game. But now, the referee's decisions can start to seem a bit provisional, and it undermines you thinking that referee is competent, that they are in charge of the match. And I think those things do end up sort of leaving people that maybe, who is running this game? Is it VAR and the referee's just going along with it? Or is it the referee who has this by the scruff of the neck? And I think that can change how we perceive these games in quite subtle ways.
And going back to Daniel and his dad, the fact that this study has shown that when VAR is called, it's overturned 95% of the time. I mean, there's an element of the moment you see that box being drawn by the ref, you're going to be thinking, uh-oh.
Totally. You go to these heart-stopping moments because you think, yes, we've got the goal, or we've let one in. And then you see the VAR. Sometimes it gives you an extra cheer. Sometimes you just have your head in your hands again and you are cursing VAR as the devil's technology. And it's going to continue. We have a long period to see how this goes now with the World Cup.
Absolutely. I will be watching it. And I know that Daniel is as well. I know that he's going to do yet another study, right?
It's a research opportunity.
It's always a research opportunity, isn't it? Ian, thank you so much.